Good afternoon. This is Daniel here with Cop Watch TV. I just want to welcome everyone into our live show where we are going to break down the most important issues in policing. We're going to go over some of the most interesting stories that have happened in the last week. And the first one we're going to talk about. It's a very controversial case. You're probably going to see it anywhere, but we're going to talk about what really happened in that case. And we've got a bunch of stuff to talk about. So just want to welcome everyone in. Really curious to see where everyone is watching from. So why don't you go ahead and put it in the chat. And, before we get started, I just want to say, if you haven't already, please make sure that you go ahead and like our channel, subscribe, and make sure you share it with friends and family. One of the things that we like to do here is get as many people in here on these live shows because, a lot of times people have interesting opinions about these different cases, and I really like going back and forth. Here's an example. So the first case that we're going to talk about, and I'll get to it here in a second, it's an officer-involved shooting involving an individual named Leonard Cure. Well, I did put a video over on one of my channels on Instagram or TikTok earlier today, and someone, responded to me about it, and, they didn't like my take on it. They had a different opinion, so I invited them in. I said, hey, here at about, just after 1 p.m. Mountain Time, I'm going to be live here on Cop Watch TV, and why don't you come on in and let's go ahead and talk about this case, and, if we disagree, that's fine. Let's talk about this case and see if we can find any kind of a common ground on what happened in this particular case. So we'll see if that individual jumps in or not. But again, you can go ahead and follow me just about everywhere over at Police Law News. I have a YouTube channel as well. It's my own that's recently been upticking lately, but I do post daily content over on Substack and Instagram, TikTok, all those places. It looks like we have Kiki in from Germany. Kiki, good to see you. Thank you so much for joining in our show. We've got Roll 7 from Texas. We have someone from Sandra is from Ohio. We have Carrie from Birmingham, Alabama, and we have Cajun Randy from Southeast Louisiana. Cajun Randy, it's good to see you in the show. A lot of times we don't agree, but that's okay. I like to have the conversation because I think it's interesting. All right, so the first thing that we're going to get into today, this first case that we're going to talk about, is the Leonard Cure officer-involved shooting that occurred in Camden County, Georgia. And we have Dan Klein is coming from down the street. Good to see you, Dan. All right, so the first case that we're going to talk about is the Leonard Cure officer-involved shooting. This happened in Camden County, Georgia. Now, my understanding is that Camden County, Georgia is right across the border from Florida. And this is a controversial officer-involved shooting for a lot of different reasons. The first reason that it's controversial, not only is Ben Crump involved in this case, but Leonard Cure, aside from this traffic stop that happened last week, he's a sympathetic guy. So this is someone that, really all of us should feel sorry for him. We should want someone like Leonard Cure to succeed, to have a good life, to do good things. And here's why. Because Leonard Cure was convicted of felonies back a while ago, and he actually did 16 years in prison for a crime he didn't commit. In 2020, Leonard Cure was actually exonerated from all of the charges. Basically the state came out and said that he was unlawfully and wrongfully convicted of the charges. He did 16 years in prison for a crime he didn't commit. Now that's something I can't even imagine. And what that might do to someone psychologically, especially as we're going to get into this case, what that might do to someone when they have future contact with law enforcement. What might that do to someone? And that's a real issue that we have here coming up in this case. So he was exonerated about 3 years ago, and one of the things that he's been doing in the last 3 years is he goes around and he speaks, which is a good thing because listen, if you're in prison for 16 years and you weren't supposed to be there, you might have some really interesting things to say. Your experience is something that I think everyone can gain value from. So the last 3 years or so, Mr. Cure has been going around. He's been talking to community groups and student groups, basically sharing his story. He said that his family said that, he was going to go back to school to take some college courses on producing music. But either way, again, this is a guy that we should all be rooting for, right? Anyone who cares about justice and the Constitution should be rooting for someone like Mr. Cure. That is until last week. So last week, October 16th, he was driving on Highway 95. There was a deputy with the Camden County, Deputy Aldridge with the Camden County County Sheriff's Office, and we do have body cam and dash cam footage of this. So Deputy Aldridge was driving in the right lane on Interstate I-95. As he was driving in the right lane, a white pickup truck passed him, driving well over 100 miles an hour compared to what the deputy said. Now, we don't know, we don't know exactly how fast the vehicle was going, but we do know that the deputy was probably traveling what that speed limit is. And Vilified Freedom gave us a super chat. Ohio right here. Thank you so much, Vilified Freedom. We absolutely appreciate that. Thank you for loving the channel. We appreciate all of the kind words. Hey, how's it going, Steve? Okay, so what happened in this case is that the deputy's traveling in the right lane. Again, we can't verify, at least as right now, how fast the white truck was going that passed him, but you can see on dash cam video that it passed the deputy like the deputy's standing still. So if the speed limit is 65 or 70 miles an hour, you can just, with your bare eyes, you can just see that this car is definitely traveling 20, 30 miles an hour faster than the deputy. So the deputy initiates a traffic stop. The vehicle doesn't stop right away. Deputy has to turn on not just lights, but sirens, but eventually the vehicle stops. At that point, the deputy approaches the car and he makes contact with the driver, who ends up being Leonard Cure, the individual who had been in prison for 16 years. He wasn't supposed to be there. He was exonerated. He's been free about 3 years now. Now, we're going to break this down kind of step by step because there's a lot of criticism of the police officer, and I'm not going to hold anyone in suspense. In my opinion, this is absolutely 100% a lawful and reasonable officer-involved shooting. I mean, it just is. And again, we have objective body camera video to show it, but there are some criticisms of the police officer as we go through it. So I'm not just going to say what happened and say the case is justified, we're going to walk away from it. No, if a police officer makes a mistake or does something tactically that I think is an error, now maybe people who are watching this don't think it was a tactical error, and I'm really happy to hear from them too. So let's get into the first part of this traffic stop. So typically when police officers make traffic stops, they do it, just about the same way. So there is something called street cop training. It's a really good training program which teaches officers to make passenger side approaches, especially on the highway. I'm 100% good with that. But typically, police departments train their officers how they want them to make traffic stops. Now, it's not the same everywhere, but typically, here's how a normal traffic stop goes. You go, hi, my name is My name is Officer Daniel from the Fargo Police Department. Can I please see your driver's license, registration, and insurance card? That would be a normal way to conduct a traffic stop. The other way that traffic stops are conducted is if, it's not a normal traffic stop just for like misdemeanor speeding or expired license plates or no headlights or something like that. The other kind of traffic stop is called what's called a felony stop, or some departments, they call it a high-risk stop. Now, essentially what that is, if you think that the driver, for whatever reason, is the suspect of a felony, has weapons, or there's some other reason that essentially, just like it sounds, makes it a high-risk stop. Well, typically the way that's conducted is, more than one police car, usually at least 3 police cars that kind of all park behind the car. The officers, you typically draw their weapons. Normally one of them has some type of a less lethal option as well, and they get on the PA system and they give the driver commands. They yell at the driver, they give the driver to commands to exit the vehicle. Now, this is for a couple reasons. If you think someone has committed a felony or is dangerous, what this does is this not only keeps the officer safe, this keeps the individual safe. Because if someone comes out of a car and they have their hand raised, and if they actually follow the instructions from police officers, then they're not going to be able to, pull out a weapon or anything like that. And again, when people don't pull out weapons against police officers, then they are ultimately safe. They ultimately live. I think that's a good outcome for cases. So those are typically the 2 different ways. A normal traffic stop, where you just walk up and say, hey, I'm Officer Daniel with the Fargo Police Department, and then you have a felony stop. However, but that's not what Deputy Aldridge did. He did something that's a little bit strange. So what he did, he approached on the driver's side. At this point, he had speeding and, maybe reckless driving. So there are a lot of jurisdictions where in the state statute, it defines what reckless driving is. So, if you drive 100 miles an hour in a 70 mile an hour zone, sometimes that would be conducted. Sometimes that would be considered reckless driving. Now, in 15 years of being a police officer in uniform on the street, I've never taken someone to jail for reckless driving just for speeding. Now, I have if someone's driving reckless, they're driving all over the road, they're drunk, they have a warrant, they're purposely trying to evade someone or running away from a crime scene, driving 110 miles an hour. Yes, I've made those arrests. But in general, a car just traveling 100 miles an hour, doing nothing else dangerous, I've not arrested for that. Now, just because it's not something that I would typically do, there's a lot of other police police officers who do that, who say, hey, if you're traveling 40 miles an hour above the speed limit, yeah, the statute allows me to arrest. I'm going to go ahead and arrest on that. So again, just because it's a difference of style, that doesn't mean the police officer is doing anything wrong. Again, the police officer is following the law, making an arrest. And in a lot of jurisdictions, not only is it state law, but a lot of times police departments have policy and training that say, hey, if someone is driving 35 miles above the speed limit, we want you guys to arrest on that. So again, that is different from jurisdiction to jurisdiction, police department from police department. But I guess what I'm saying is that in general, it's not crazy. It wouldn't be strange to say, driving 100 miles an hour, that's an arrestable offense. I could definitely see a pathway where that could happen. Well, that's what Deputy Aldridge was trying to do in this case. He basically made the decision, okay, who's ever driving this car, and again, the car passed him 2 lanes over going 100 miles an hour. He had no idea who was in the car, right? So he basically made the decision that I'm going to arrest this driver for reckless driving. So instead of waiting and calling backup or calling the guy doing some kind of a felony stop to come on out, he basically approaches the car, and as he's on the driver's side, just as he's about at the back of the pickup truck, he's not quite there, he starts yelling and screaming at the driver. He yells, "Get out, get out, get out of the car." So it's at that point that Mr. Cure actually gets out of the car. And, the deputy, he doesn't say any conversation. There's no, hey, listen, I stopped you because you're doing 100. Listen, this is so fast, you're going to be arrested for reckless driving. The deputy doesn't have that conversation with him. I think he probably should, but he doesn't have that conversation with Mr. Cure. And he just starts giving Mr. Cure commands. So he tells Mr. Cure to put his hands on the truck. And, the deputy wants to go ahead and arrest Mr. Cure. That's the intent of the deputy. So to me, intent means a lot. I know I've said this on a lot of different shows, and not everybody agrees, but to me, intent means a lot. So the deputy's intent was to arrest Mr. Cure for reckless driving. Okay, well, if the deputy does what he wants to do, is that legal? Well, the answer is yes. There's nothing legally or morally wrong with arresting someone for reckless driving when they're driving 100 miles an hour. So this was legal for the deputy to do. But, again, in my mind, the deputy probably could have done it in a better way. So he basically, yells commands and gives orders for Mr. Cure. As he's giving orders, he tells Mr. Cure, Mr. Cure's out of the vehicle. He tells him to place his hands on the truck. And it's at that point, here's where something is just going to go haywire, where this is not going to be a good contact, because Mr. Cure responds, "I ain't doing shit." Listen, it's at this point that any police officer who's been on for any amount of time, things aren't going to go good. That's the time to call for backup. That's the time to de-escalate. That's the time to disengage. So when you're giving someone a lawful command and their response is, "I ain't doing shit," shit's going down. You just know that it is. Well, it's at that point that obviously Mr. Cure, he cooperates a little bit. So eventually he does place his hands on the truck, and he basically he does ask the deputy a very reasonable question. So if I was in that position, having police officer just bark orders at me, not knowing why, I would ask why. Now maybe if I was traveling 100 miles an hour, I would know why. But let's say Mr. Cure didn't know why. Maybe he didn't realize how fast he was going. So the deputy at that point, he tells Mr. Cure, yes, I agree. He should have told Mr. Cure why he was being handcuffed and arrested, 12 seconds before, okay? But he didn't. But at this point, he does. Mr. Cure asks the reasonable question, why all this is happening. It's at that point the deputy says, you're under arrest for reckless driving and speeding because you're driving 100 miles an hour. And they kind of have it back and forth where, Mr. Cure says, well, isn't that just a speeding ticket? And the deputy says, no, reckless driving, that's actually an arrestable offense. So they do have a little back and forth. And the deputy, so what's important to me is that what I like to see in cases like that, at least from the side of a police officer, I want police officers, if possible and if safe, to be able to tell people, hey, you're under arrest. This is why you're under arrest. Now, it's not always safe. It's not always possible to do that. But if possible, I think police officers should give citizens as much information as possible. Because if we want people to believe in police officers, or at least to follow their commands, we have to at least give them some reason of why we're doing what we're doing when it's safe to do so. And the deputy did that in this case. Again, I wish he would have done it 12 seconds earlier, but he didn't. But he did eventually. And he was actually pretty quick in the contact. Really, as soon as Mr. Cure asked for why this was happening, the deputy went ahead and told him why he was being under arrest. And essentially at that point, Mr. Cure, he doesn't follow instructions. He doesn't listen. The officer, the way that the use of force goes in, listen, we want use of force. Not only is it trained, but this is just good best practices, is for use of force to be progressive in nature. So hopefully what we want police officers to do is to start that if an officer has to use force in order to effect an arrest, is that hopefully we want police officers to use the lowest level of use of force possible. That's what we want, right? So using the lowest level of force possible. So in this this case, that's what the officer does. He uses just his hands. He doesn't use a taser. He doesn't use a gun, doesn't use a baton, doesn't use mace. He tries to get Mr. Cure's hands behind his back. Mr. Cure resists arrest. It's at that point the police officer then switches to a taser. And he doesn't just tase Mr. Cure. He doesn't just pop up the taser and zap him. That's not what he does. He gives Mr. Cure a warning and says, hey, if you don't stop, if you don't cooperate, if you don't put your hands behind your back, you're going to be tased. That's another good thing in the favor of the officer because, again, this isn't always possible. But if possible, what I want police officers to do, what I think is good practice, is to tell police, for police officers to tell people, if safe, hey, this is what's going to happen. You are going to be tased if you don't cooperate, because I think if possible, if safe, police officers should give people, hey, options. Hey, if you don't cooperate, this is what will happen. I don't want police officers to just, surprise people with use of force. But in this case, the officer didn't. He told Mr. Cure what he wanted Mr. Cure to do, so no one's confused. He then said, if you don't do this, you will be tased, and he pulled out his taser. To me, this is all in the basket, in the category of the police officer being reasonable and literally doing everything that he possibly can to get Mr. Cure to cooperate. Well, at that point, Mr. Cure doesn't cooperate, and the police officer uses the taser. Now, the taser, it seems like you can hear it cycling, but it obviously didn't make contact. Both probes didn't make contact because you can hear it cycling, but Mr. Cure doesn't fall to the ground. So it doesn't have the desired effect, which is neuromuscular incapacitation, because Mr. Cure is still able to stand there. During the cycle, Mr. Cure starts waving his hands around, so you could tell that he's trying to bat and swat away the probes. At least one of the probes is attached to him. It's at that point that Mr. Cure, as he's batting away and moving his arms around, he advances quickly towards the police officer, and the officer and Mr. Cure both get into kind of a wrestling match. It's like a standing wrestling match where they both kind of hugging and they have their arms around each other. It's at that point, while that's happening, that Mr. Cure is able to essentially overpower the officer. What he does, he uses his hand to grab. He uses his hand to grab. He uses his hands to grab the officer's throat. And while we're going through this, I know Cajun Randy is commenting. Cajun Randy, what are your thoughts about what the officer should use? So what level of force should the officer use for this case? So again, so let's talk about the options. Police officer can go hands-on. They can use a taser. They can use a baton. They could use mace. They could use a taser. So again, I've talked about tasers before. I think taser is probably the best option. But if you don't like a taser, tell me what you think. If you want to argue the police officer should use a baton and smash someone's knee in where they're going to have lifelong injuries, you can make that argument. I'm going to disagree and say, hey, the cops should use a taser. It's uncomfortable for 5 seconds. Then you get in handcuffs and then you're totally fine. That's my preference because I don't like people to get long-lasting injuries. But if you want to say police officers should be bashing people with batons, that again, I'm gonna disagree. That's more like 1980s style. I'm gonna disagree of that. But yeah, that's a 1980s superhero cop bashing people with batons. I'd rather use a taser. I think it's safer for everybody. Anyway, so what Mr. Cure does is he actually puts his hand around the deputy's throat and he pushes the deputy back. He's basically choking the deputy, and as he's doing it, and you can watch the video on this, it's real creepy. It's real fucking eerie. As he's holding the deputy, you can tell the deputy's gurgling and can't breathe. As he's holding the deputy's throat, pushing his head back, he says, "Yeah, bitch. Yeah, bitch." I mean, it's creepy. It's fucking spooky if you watch this video. So it's at that point that after 4 or 5 seconds of being choked, the deputy is able to take out his handgun. He does fire at Mr. Cure one time. Mr. Cure does suffer life-threatening injuries. So those are the facts. That's what happened. There isn't. There really aren't any other facts in this. And to me, this is absolutely 100% a justified, lawful, objectively reasonable officer-involved shooting. Now, of course, they've hired Ben Crump, and they're saying that it's not lawful shooting. And again, so this is my question. So you're a police officer. You have someone who is literally choking you. So again, imagine if the roles were reversed, and it was Deputy Aldridge who was holding Leonard Cure by the throat. I mean, in this situation, Deputy Aldridge, he's George Floyd, okay? That's what's happening here. And Mr. Cure is doing his best impression of Derek Chauvin. I mean, this is completely insane. So police officers cannot use deadly force unless they are faced with a deadly threat. And in my mind, when someone is bigger than you and stronger than you, they've overpowered you, and they literally have their hand around your throat, that's a deadly force situation. It's almost one of the most justified officer-involved shootings because, again, the officer literally waits until he's having the life choked out of him before he shoots Mr. Cure one time. I'm really curious to see what your thoughts are. And again, what I'm looking for is, obviously there's free speech. You can comment whatever you want. But what I'd be interested in, if you don't think the police officer should have utilized deadly force, what should they have done? So just saying all cops are bad, all cops are racist, no, that's fine. It isn't that interesting. It's fine. But, tell me, what should the police officer have done? That's what I'm really curious to see, what people have to say about this particular case. And while you're thinking of that, maybe putting in some comments, what they're basically doing in this case, because, what I learned in law school, what they've talked about in law school is that, if you're representing a client and if you have the facts, argue the facts. If you're representing a client, you have the law, then you argue the law. And if you don't have anything, just pound your hand on the table and scream. So basically what Ben Crump and people are doing is they're pounding their hand on the table and screaming because they don't have the facts, they don't have the law. This is anyone who is even a tiny bit honest can watch unbiased body and dash cam video and say, well, yeah, he's being choked. What do you want the deputy to do? It's really the only option he had. But what they're doing, they're going through the deputy's prior internal affairs records. They're looking at IA cases the deputy had from 10 years ago with a different department. And again, when you know that people like Ben Crump have nothing, it's when they go down this rabbit hole. Because think of Derek Chauvin. All you had to do is play that video, and that's all you need to say, hey, Derek Chauvin did something wrong. That's all you have to show is that video. You don't have to talk about all of the other stuff that Derek Chauvin did. That's really all you have to do. In a case like this. So the fact that they're going back 10 years and trying to find other cases about, Ben Crump's trying to find other cases from when this guy was in kindergarten playing cops and robbers and trying to use that against him. The whole thing is ridiculous. Now, I think it's important to look to say, yes, let's look at it from the point of the Cure family, right? So it's like, yes, he did 16 years. He shouldn't have done 16 years. Now he's out and he's killed by a police officer. So I hate criticizing the family because, again, no family who has someone killed by a police, no matter what the circumstance are, no matter how reasonable and justified, again, they're not going to be in the right headspace. They're not going to in a space where they're able to be honest. But they're saying things like, that Mr. Cure, that he had PTSD, that something the officer did triggered him and made him act like that. Yes, I think that's probably all true. So I guess my question is, when he got out of prison, he spent 3 years out of prison. He's talking with different people. I'm just curious, did he have some kind of psychologist, some type of coach, some type of mentor would say, hey, listen, Leonard, at some point you're going to have contact with police officers. How are you going to deal with that? So was he having contact with police officers? I just wonder, was there any work done on the front end? Because to me, this seems pretty predictable. Again, Leonard Cure, he had a right to absolutely be upset and to be mad with the system and not trust the system. Then that doesn't mean he gets to choke every police officer who stops him for the rest of his life. So what was done on the front end for him to try to deal with this? And we have to look at it this way, because I want situations like this to not occur. All right, that's the goal. Now, one way to not have this happen is police officers just not try to arrest people for driving 100 miles an hour. Well, that doesn't make sense. So people who just get out of prison, who've been there a long time, maybe there was something in the system that didn't go their way, or maybe it was a situation where they were wrongfully convicted. What kind of resources are we providing to these people so stuff like this doesn't happen? Let's see. So Cajun Randy says, he mentioned Elijah McClain would have justified in using deadly force. We're not talking about Elijah McClain, so I'm not sure how Elijah McClain is talking about here. Steve says, what do you think about prosecutors letting the statute of limitations run out to cover up for bad cops? Steve, again, so Steve likes to ask these questions. You'd have to give me an example, and then let's go ahead and talk about it. So in my mind, police officers are prosecuted all the time. Like I said, if you see a police officer doing that on purpose, give me the case. Let's go ahead and talk about it. I mean, I would say, if anything, I see DAs doing that in the favor of people who aren't pro police. Yeah, I mean, on the flip side of that, Steve, you have people like the attorney general in a bunch of states are going after police officers for all kinds of stuff that they probably shouldn't be going after police officers for, because there's a real high anti-police sentiment, especially with prosecutors who were funded by George Soros. So, if anything, I think it's the exact opposite way, and police officers are getting prosecuted when they shouldn't. But again, give me a case. Let's go ahead and talk about it, Steve. But in general, no. I think if a police officer commits a crime, I think that the police officer should be charged with the crime. Said that a bunch of times. That doesn't change now. Okay, all right. So that's going to be that case. Like I said, that's a pretty big, important case because Ben Crump is on it. I did write an article about this case over on my Substack Police Law newsletter. Go ahead and sign up for that over at Substack. I have a long form article that I write. It's going to be coming out tomorrow. If you have any other comments, definitely put it in our chat here over on Facebook and YouTube. Otherwise, catch me on Substack. So the next case that I want to talk about, and this may not be a national story. This is more of a local story for where this happened, but I think it's important because it really talks about a couple important issues. So this happened on October 6th in Bernalillo County, New Mexico, which is essentially near the Albuquerque area. The unincorporated parts of Albuquerque are patrolled by Bernalillo County deputies. So what happened in this case is deputies with the Bernalillo County Sheriff's Police were dispatched to a domestic disturbance call in the middle of the day. So it's daytime outside, and you get to these areas. It's either in the North Valley or South Valley. I'm not sure where. It's kind of like a lot of people, they have like third of an acre, half an acre. They have fences, but the fences don't really. It's really difficult to tell addresses. That's the I grew up on the south side of Chicago where I knew exactly what my address is. Everything was in grids, but in this part of New Mexico, that's not always the case. You got these cul-de-sacs, and again, so I guess where I'm going with this is a lot of time it's different. Especially if police officers are trying to find a resident. So deputies in this case, they knew the street, so they park on the street, but they're trying to find the house. Yes, again, so in this case, addresses are often hard to find because things aren't on a grid. The streets aren't always straight. The streets are small. And again, sometimes the only way you can see the address of where you're going is if you actually walk right up to the house. They're not where anybody can see it. There may not be mailboxes with they have faded numbers. So again, this is a problem for police officers in areas like this. It's definitely like this in Bernalillo County. So police officers, deputies are dispatched to a domestic disturbance call in the middle of the day. They park on the street, and the body cam shows them walking around asking, right now they're on the public street, so they haven't entered anybody's driveway or property. But again, since they're called to a domestic disturbance call, it's not trespassing. They can go on the property and ring the doorbell and say, hey, does anybody here need police? So police officers are able to do that. So any comments about how the police are trespassing, that's absolutely ridiculous. Again, that's just not a thing. If police officers get a call for service, going to knock on that door, that's not trespassing. Just like it's not trespassing if an Amazon driver drops something off, or a pizza delivery person, that isn't trespassing. That's absolutely ridiculous. But I know people are going to say that, or they're at least going to think it. So police officers are trying to figure out what's going on. They see what they think. They get one of them says, I think that's the house over there, and there's a gate. The gate is wide open. So police officers take about one step into the gate. From the body camera footage, it's hard to tell if they actually take one step onto the property or if they just kind of go even with the gate. Either way, they have a legal reason to go and make contact at the house. But like I said, they haven't even walked up the entire driveway yet. They maybe taken like one step onto the property. I also should note that the family who's involved, who's in there on this, they're actually sitting on the porch. So it's not like they didn't see the police officers. They didn't know the police officers there. They're sitting on the porch watching all of this, right? And at no point did they say, hey, you guys get out of here. We're not involved. Nothing. They're sitting there just watching the police officers do this. And they have no issue with the police officers be there because they can see the cops. They're right there. So as the police officers are either just about to enter the property or still on the street, a white pit bull, a dog named Leche, actually runs out of the yard, runs up to the police officers, is growling and barking. And, just imagine a vicious pit bull. Some pit bulls are really nice. I know a really nice one named Lalo. Great dog. But imagine like the meanest pit bull that you can think of, coming after you. That's what this thing was. So the police officer, he backs up, he goes, whoa, what's going on? And then you see the police officer, you can clearly see now, the dog is about 70 pounds, about a 70-pound pit bull. So you can see that the dog is no longer like, is it just in like the area? You can see the police officer, it's probably 10, 15 feet back from where the gate would enter anyways. And again, police officer did have a right to go in there, but this happened on the public street. The dog actually chased the police officer back onto the public street. It was at that point that the dog was, coming after the police officer. The police officer did draw his handgun. He did shoot the dog one time. The dog ran away, and you could tell the police officer that the dog whined and squealed, but the officer, you couldn't tell whether the dog was hit or not, or where it was hit, or how injured it was. So he yelled to the people on the porch, who are still just sitting there, who aren't saying anything, even though the police officer just fired a gun. So as they're sitting there, the people on the porch, the deputy calls it out over the radio. And the people, so the deputy calls it out over the radio, and he tells the people, hey, check on your dog, and they're like, what? They're asking questions like, what? Like, I don't know what they thought the police officer was shooting at. Later on, they told the news, they said something to the effect of, we were just sitting inside, got back from walking the dogs, so we were sitting there, we heard 2 gunshots, and I came running out. That's what one of the owners said. His name is Jerry Carbajal. He went and talked to the news. So the police officer basically yells at the people, hey, I just shot your dog, make sure it's okay, I think I shot it in the chest. So the people start to try to find their dog, and immediately they start yelling at the police officers, and they start saying, hey, why did you shoot the dog? And the deputy says, because it came after me, because it attacked me. And again, we clearly know it did, because we have it on body cam. And immediately, like a reflex, the people start to say, the dog didn't attack you. Yeah, like this officer, he wakes up in the morning, he's like, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to go shoot a random dog just because I think it's fun. And I'm going to put it all on body camera footage. Like, that's insane. Of course the dog attacked him. So that's what the people were saying. The dog was scooped up and taken to the emergency room. The dog will survive. So again, this isn't the dog's fault. This is the dog just being a dog, okay? And it's a good thing that BCSO, the Bernalillo County Sheriff's Office, they actually just got Axon body cameras. One of the reasons why we have this so good. So before any kind of body cam footage came out, maybe when the family thought that they could just pull one over, on the community and on the department if they want to sue them, because they did an interview with the news pretty shortly after this. They did an interview on the news, and I would encourage everyone to listen. I would encourage everyone to listen to the video, to the interview on the news. But basically, one of the owners, Jerry Carbajal, he made 3 very specific complaints about the deputies. All right, and here's what the complaints were. The first one is, he said that the deputies had no lawful reason to be on the property or in the area. Okay. The second one, he said that the dog was tied up when it was shot. And the third, he said that the deputies on scene refused to give the family any information as to why the dog was shot. He made again, if you listen to his statement, he rambles on and on and on with a bunch of nonsense. But in that rambling, I was able to pull out those very 3 specific indictments that he makes against the deputies. Luckily, like I said before, the deputies with the Bernalillo County Sheriff's Office, they wear Axon body cameras. So not only, I want to say this, so not only do the deputies with the Bernalillo County Sheriff's Office, not only do they wear body cameras, but the leadership there is actually pretty good. Sheriff John Allen is doing a really good job. So whoever he has working this program, whatever, it's actually a really good thing, because the leadership got out in front of this. They saw this interview and they didn't respond. Like, they didn't say anything rude about the people. They just said, you know what, we're just going to put out the body camera footage. Here is the body camera footage, which I think is so I think it's a really great really great thing that they put out the body camera footage. And basically, here's what the body camera footage shows. I should also say that Sheriff Allen also has an animal abuse task force. So he's real good on these things. So what Sheriff Allen did is he had the body camera come out, which is great. Also, the body camera showed a couple different things. It showed that the deputies were supposed to be there, that they were dispatched to a domestic disturbance call. They weren't just walking around doing nothing, saying, you know what I'm going to do? We're just going to go bother these people at the end of the street for no reason. Maybe we could shoot one of their dogs. Again, so that's absolutely insane. There's also what the body camera footage shows is that the dog was not tied up. Clearly, the dog was not tied up. And third, it shows that the deputy immediately explained to the owners the reason that the dog was shot, because it had attacked the deputy. So again, it's a good thing that the Bernalillo County Sheriff's Department does wear body camera footage, because it's absolutely insane. And this is my opinion. I'm really curious to see what you think about that. If a person files a false complaint against a police officer, I think that they should be prosecuted. I just think they should do that. They should absolutely be prosecuted. I would like to say that the officer should be able to sue the person, but because police officers are considered public figures, and a lot of time there's no damages, so really it doesn't meet the defamation law. But if you file a false complaint against a police officer, the police department should just file criminal charges against you. If you can show that there was bad intent, which there obviously was here, and there's on body camera footage where it's objective evidence that clearly the dog wasn't tied up. Also, again, I'm going to say this is not the fault of the dog. This is a dog being a dog. This is a case of irresponsible and dishonest pet owners. I have two dogs, two Great Pyrenees. If someone comes on my property, into my house, someone breaks into my house, my dogs are absolutely nuts. Okay, so it's my responsibility as a dog owner to make sure that they don't get out into the public. And certainly having a gate that's wide open when you're sitting on a porch, you see the open gate, the dog's there, you see cops walking up. Again, it's like in Fight Club. What did you think was going to happen? It's absolutely insane. All right, so that's my case on that, my opinions on that. Let's see if we have any comments on there. Let's see. So Carrie Bama says, if the police were there on a call, they did have a right to enter the gate. Yeah, I agree. So 100%. Yeah. If police officers are called to a domestic dispute or to a burglary, or if police officers are called to a call for service, they are absolutely allowed to go ahead, walk up the driveway and knock on the door. Does that mean that they can kick in the door and enter your house anytime they want? No, of course not. But yes, if police officers get a call about a disturbance, they can walk onto the property and ring the doorbell just like an Amazon driver can. Of course, that's the case. That's not that. Let's not be silly. Sog68 says, it seems like people want to turn every law enforcement encounter into a payday. Sog68, thank you so much. That's exactly what this is. And if police officers didn't, that's why I'm not just because we have a body camera channel here. That's one of the reasons why I'm such an advocate for body cameras, is for stuff like this. I think it helps out police officers more often than not. And if a body camera footage, if the truth is that it hurts a police officer, yes, I don't want people to have their rights violated, and people should be able to use body camera footage in order to sue police officers, because we want good police officers to be out there who aren't violating the law. And body cameras, it should keep both sides honest, which is one of the points about this. Let's see, any other comments on this case? Let's see, ROL7 says, for exigent circumstances like screaming inside the house, police can enter forcefully. Thank you so much, Rold. Yes, 100%. I'll tell you a story real quick. So all police officers are going to have stories like this, so this one isn't a big deal. I bet every police officer, retired cop on here can tell a more interesting story. But the last time that I was on patrol, back in 2018-19-ish, I was on patrol. We were at a domestic disturbance call over at a hotel, and you get there and you take hundreds, thousands of these calls. Most of the time they're not a big deal, but this was one where as we get there, me and my partner, there is a woman inside this hotel apartment kind of a thing, long-term stay place, where she's screaming for her life. It's one of those things where it's like, hey, I've been working for, at that point, 16, 17 years as a cop, and it's only happened a couple times where it's someone on the other side of the door is literally screaming for their life. So I had to kick in the door, and we went in, and yeah, that was a time. Listen, if that's the case, if police officers have an honest belief that you are thinking that someone is dying or could suffer great bodily injury, that isn't the time to go, hey, again on the radio, hey Sarge, hey, this is what I have, or can you go ahead and call the DA? I think she's being choked in there. No, that's absolutely not. Under exigent circumstances, police can and should enter in a situation like this. And just to wrap up that story, at the end of that, yeah, he had the lady in a chokehold, and he was trying to seriously hurt her when me and my partner got in there. So it was actually a neighbor who called. So that's who I credit with saving this woman's life, is the neighbor who called police and got police officers there. Because if it wouldn't have been me and my partner, any other police officer would have done the exact same thing, and that's really what you need. All right, any other comments on this? Let's see. No other comments on that case. All right, so the last case that we're going to talk about, and this is a case like this should be national news, and it kind of was national news. But a case like this, typically if the victims or if the offender is the right demographic, this is the kind of case that is going to be on the news almost forever. So this was at the Texas State Fair last week. So last week, there was a report of an active shooter over at the Texas State Fair in Dallas. Now, it ended up not being an active shooter, but at the time, people don't know that. So here at the State Fair in Dallas, there's literally thousands of people at the State Fair, and gunshots start ringing out. Well, thousands of people, gunshots. So everyone tried to leave the State Fair at the same time. There was panic. I mean, it was a crazy scene watching everybody try to leave the State Fair, which is reasonable. It ended up being an individual. His name is Cameron Turner, 22-year-old. He had a dispute with someone, and he shot not just the person he was having a dispute with, he shot 3 other people. So thankfully, luckily, no one suffered any fatal injuries. So all of the injuries were non-life-threatening injuries, which is the most important thing. So after Cameron Turner, a 22-year-old, after he shot 3 people, instead of sticking around to be responsible for his actions, he ran away from the scene. Police officers, not only are they at the State Fair, they're around the State Fair. There's a lot of cops at places like this. They were actually able to get him into custody pretty quick. Luckily, Cameron didn't threaten the police officers. He basically cooperated. He cooperated with the police officers, so he wasn't harmed. They didn't have to use force to arrest him. They didn't shoot him or anything like that. And this is Texas, so there's a lot of law-abiding citizens there wanting to help police. So they're able to get some really good witnesses. But a case like this, and the reason why I'm talking about this case, a case like this, it basically exposes 2 inaccuracies. It basically talks about 2 different myths, and is basically it is some proof that these things are myths when it comes to police officers. So the first one, so if you haven't known this case already, Cameron Turner is a 22-year-old young black guy. So the first myth is that police officers kill black suspects indiscriminately all the time, which isn't the case. So here's what I say almost every time, and it has nothing to do, has very use of force, especially deadly use of force from police officers, has very little to do with the crime you commit. It is literally about how much resistance you give the police officers. And here's my example of this, because everyone remembers the Kyle Rittenhouse case, right? So Kyle Rittenhouse, he shot 3 people. Now, again, all the 3 people he shot, it was completely legal. All the people were trying to kill him, and he shot them in self-defense. That's what a court found. I think that was the right decision. But Kyle Rittenhouse, when he was taken into custody, he was not shot and killed by police officers. And a lot of anti-police activists, when Kyle Rittenhouse was arrested, that's all I heard on the news for months and months and even years after the Kyle Rittenhouse case. It said, if that were a black guy, the police officers would have shot him. They never would have taken him alive. And I said for a long time, that's bullshit. Because Kyle Rittenhouse, he didn't attack police officers. He didn't threaten police officers. So there'd be no reason why a police officer would try to harm Kyle Rittenhouse. Well, the same thing is true with Cameron Turner, who again shot 3 people, and he's an African-American guy. Because even though his crime was shooting 3 people, he cooperated with police. He didn't threaten police. He didn't pose any kind of a danger to police. He cooperated with police, and he was arrested without incident. Listen, this is how we want arrests to go, and it's just important to get the information out there. If you don't attack or threaten police, literally you could shoot 3 random people, give up, put your hands up in the air, and the vast majority of the time you're going to be arrested without incident, where you're not harmed, which is what we want to happen in all arrests. That's one of the points why we do this show, is because we want there to be less violence between citizens and police officers. And no matter what you do, as long as you cooperate with the police, the vast majority, statistical percent of the time, you're going to be just fine, which is what we want. So that was the first myth that this just kind of smashes, that says, hey, yeah, Kyle Rittenhouse shot 3 people, but he cooperated with police. That's why he wasn't shot. Cameron Turner, a black guy, he shot 3 people, but he didn't threaten police. He was also arrested without police officers using force. Again, that's just evidence in that bucket of what I'm saying is absolutely correct on this based on data that we have. So the second is that, gun laws don't work. I know we've talked about this before, but, so here's what they did for the Texas State Fair. So, there's a senior vice president of public relations for the Texas State Fair. I'm going to read her statement really quick, because I know Texas is a real Second Amendment kind of place, right? A lot of people like guns, but, a place like the State Fair, that's kind of a place where if you go around the country, they don't allow, if you go to like sports games and concerts and, remember the Alamo, okay? So if you remember, Texas is the kind of place where again, like sporting events and concerts, they don't allow firearms in there. Well, how does a place like Texas, like a very pro-Second Amendment, but you have a big event? So how do places like Texas do that? I'm going to read you the quote from the senior vice president of the public relations of the state fair. Her name is Carissa. Here's what she said. We don't allow weapons in the Texas State Fair. However, we understand that Texans have the rights to carry their weapons. So we have a middle ground where those who have a license to carry are allowed to come in with a concealed weapon. Okay, so basically what they've decided to do is say, hey, if you went through the training, if you went through the process, the hassle of getting a concealed carry license in Texas, as you walk up to the ticket counter, you say, hey, my name is Daniel. I have a concealed carry license. Here it is. Cool. They let you through. Otherwise, everyone else is not allowed to carry. So again, I'm not saying I agree with that. I'm not saying it's right or wrong on either way. I'm just saying that's how Texas does it. So where I'm going with this is they have a confined, controlled area of the Texas State Fair. And even in a place like that where you have to buy a ticket, you have to walk in, literally everyone is searched. Even in a situation like that, Cameron Turner, who does not have a concealed carry permit, he was able to get a handgun in. So the idea that, again, even when law enforcement and private security and, the directors of the Texas State Fair, again, they're trying to keep out rogue handguns in a small confined area, not just like the general street where people can walk around wherever. In a very confined place, they weren't even able to do it there. So I think that's important to remember just when it comes to common sense, gun control, what's going to work, what doesn't work. And obviously, even something like this, it's very difficult to keep guns out of the hands of bad people. That being said, if we know that, we can walk down this and have a reasonable conversation. If criminals, quote unquote bad people are going to get their hands on guns, what should the rest of us do? Just say, oh, okay, we'll just leave it up to police and whatever security, they're going to keep us safe. Well, that would be great, but that's ideal, and things don't always happen ideally. Cameron Turner is a reason why. So Cameron Turner has been charged, and I just want to say, like I've said multiple times, people who violate the murder law are not going to follow the gun control laws. When you add defunding and dismantling police departments, it's kind of like the seasoning on the top of this shit sandwich. The result is predictable. Bad people are going to have guns, so we do have a personal responsibility to keep ourselves safe. It's a good thing that we did have a quick police response in this. We were able to get Mr. Turner into custody pretty quick. So those are the cases that I wanted to talk about. Curious to see if anyone has any comments about any of these cases. Let's see. Steve says, from what I've seen, Texas talk a big game, but will not do anything when it comes to the nut cutting. All right. Okay, Steve. Well, I don't know what you mean by that, but all right. Let's see. Nomadic Adventure says, entering a fenced-in backyard with a no trespassing sign without a warrant can get tricky. Under certain circumstances, law enforcement may enter without a warrant. Yeah, no, Nomadic Adventures. Yeah, that's a really good point. So you have to look at it this way. Just about anything with the law is going to be what's reasonable. So it's what's reasonable. So what steps did people take in order to secure their property? Do they have a 6-foot fence with barbed wire and signs that make it where police officers can't get in? Where then should police officers get a warrant? Sure, yes. But again, if you have a situation where there's a report or evidence that someone might be in the process of being injured, yeah, exigent circumstances basically cut right through any warrant requirement. I was actually just teaching a class a couple days ago about this, where it talks about there are exceptions to the warrant requirement. One of them are exigent circumstances. But with that exigent circumstance, I think it's important to say it's not something that police officers can just find later. It's not like police officers can just go in and then after they're in, they see something, they go, oh, well, it's a good thing we came in because this person was really in trouble. No, police officers have to have that information. They have to articulate that information before they enter in order for it to be a lawful exception to the warrant requirements. Thank you. Really good comment there. Let's see. Kira Bama says, criminals can either buy guns off the streets or steal them. Gun laws don't work for criminals who don't care about following laws. Yeah, Kira Bama, I agree 100%. I've used this example before. I grew up on the south side of Chicago. I lived there until I was 22 years old. The entire 22 years that I lived in Chicago, handguns were illegal inside the city of Chicago. So me and my family, we were not able to have a handgun inside of our house. During those 22 years, Chicago had one of the highest gun murder violence rates in the entire country. Explain that to me. It doesn't make any sense. Even if you agree that maybe we should do a different policy, you should be able to agree that these types of gun laws don't work for achieving the goal of lowering gun violence. All right. Okay, so that's going to be our show for today. I really wanted to thank everyone for coming in. If you happen to watch this show later, or if you think of an interesting case that maybe we didn't get, you think, I really wish Dan would talk about this one, definitely put it in the chat, because these chats are something that I check periodically throughout the week. So definitely get a hold of us there. And if you haven't already, make sure that you subscribe to the channel, share it with friends and family, and I hope that everyone has a great and safe weekend. Thanks.